We move to Queen's Park now, where the delicate dance of budgeting is going to be in focus today, of course, as the provincial budget's coming down. And, of course, that's a perfect segue to bring in CTV political commentator Scott Reid. Of course, he breaks down stories from all different levels of government for us weekly here on CP24 Breakfast. But today, of course, Scott, as we welcome you in, we're going to talk about the provincial budget. Peter Bethlenfalvy, the Minister of Finance, is going to not increase any taxes and trying to look at relief at the pumps and sort of talking about housing and all kinds of factors here. What are you expecting to see in here today?
Well, I'm expecting what they've told us to expect, right? So they're going to place the focus on economic affordability. There'll be something around housing. They're going to really try to keep the focus on the economy and on growth. And I think that's the most interesting aspect of the budget in a funny way, in that this government is talking all the time about economic issues, talking about affordability. And I think in part because they've got a very tricky balance to manage. If, for example, they're supposed to have a balanced budget next year, right, I think that's a political risk for them. And you would think, well, why running a balanced budget? Wouldn't that be a victory? Wouldn't that be seen as an example of competent, capable management? But I think in this circumstance, with so many families moving off of the economy but moving toward health care, when so many families struggle to find a family doctor, when emergency wards are crammed, when we feel the system straining, I think the government's very, very carefully trying to keep the issue off of health care, trying to keep the issue off of that. And if it balances the budget, then it's going to open itself up to questions of, well, does that mean you're prioritizing fiscal health above fundamental health? Why aren't you putting more money into hiring more doctors and more communities? And so I think that dance is going to get interesting, speaking of salsa and sequence, because the government's going to have to really be careful. And I wouldn't be surprised if they let the balanced budget projections slide a year rather than open themselves up to that political vulnerability. So I'll be watching for that.
Interesting. Of course, this coming from your communications and political background. Of course, you worked in Paul Martin's office. April 16th is the federal budget that's coming down. How much is the federal government paying attention to what happens in Ontario today then? What would you estimate?
A little bit. Here's the funny thing. And back in my day,
it was reversed,
federal
wasn't it?
budget would always be in February. The provinces would look very heavily toward the federal budget, sort of say, well, what programs, what expenditures, what announcements might have impact on our bottom line. And you would see them, dovetail and configure into their own planning what happened federally. Now it's a little bit of the reverse. So I don't think hugely. I watched the housing file where we see a little bit of scrap already happening.
So let's talk about that, because, of course, at the federal level, Sean Fraser's really kind of been going after Premier Doug Ford in terms of the housing plan, the idea no fourplexes in the province, and with potentially withholding some funds for Ontario earmarked for affordable housing here. So what's going on with this spat?
Well, what's interesting about this is, of course, for 2 years at least, maybe longer, what have we heard between Ottawa and Queen's Park? Harmony.
Pretty much, yeah.
Doug Ford appears with Chrystia Freeland. He says she's my favorite person in the world. We play pickleball and have drinks by the pool together like we're pals. And all of a sudden, you see a couple of sharp things. You see Doug Ford last week sending a letter to the Prime Minister saying, hey, I got a bunch of problems. Here are things we need to have a priority on. Much sharper, confrontational tone. And now you see Sean Fraser saying, hey, you know what? That blank check on affordable housing, it ain't so blank anymore. So if you guys don't fill in some pictures in the way that I want to see them drawn, we may withhold these monies. And I think the reason that this is happening is that both sides recognize that for a certain period of time, it was in their mutual political interest to be seen to be getting along. Now it is in their mutual political interest to be fighting. If you're Sean Fraser and you can't build houses overnight, but you need to show leadership on the housing file, you need to show that the federal government cares and is doing something, one of the ways to get in the news is conflict. And so having a sharp confrontation with the Premier of Ontario, it's going to generate a lot of news. Here we are. The fight for these guys, in a funny way, is good. And I think that Doug Ford actually welcomes the fight as well, because he says, well, it's an unpopular government, so I'm happy to have a fight with them. It actually is something that works both in their favor. It isn't always about getting
dynamic.
along. Sometimes
really
the political play is to have a fight. It at least puts you in the news.
Right, that's so true. It's a really good point there, Scott. In the meantime, we got about 30 seconds talking municipally, getting a bit of an update on the Eglinton Crosstown yesterday. Phil Verster talking about this, and also Mayor Chow was there as well. This is just a mess.
Why? So they're telling us, hey, great news. The Eglinton Crosstown is now completed in terms of construction. Can't tell you when it's actually going to work, when we'll turn the key and the engine will come to life on this damned thing. However, we're adding 7 stations. I don't know why the mayor would have agreed to appear at this press conference. That's my municipal observation. This project has been such a mess. It's been such a thunderstorm of bad news. I don't know until they announce a date when this thing is operational, why would the mayor want to be anywhere near it? Hey, you like the Eglinton Crosstown? We got more of it for you. I got news for you. Nobody likes it. Nobody's happy.
So be there when it opens or when they say it's going to open. Don't be there for this portion.
Be there when a train is rolling. Don't talk to me about it. And I think it was a mistake for the mayor to let herself have any of that Eglinton Crosstown mud splashed on her cuffs.
Okay, it's always interesting to get your perspective. CTV political commentator Scott Reid, thanks so much. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Thanks,
All right,
Nick.
Have a great day.
See you, brother.
Yeah.